Good evening. Good to see everyone tonight. Hopefully, got a few more people coming in, but hopefully no uneventful trip here. I think Haley and I passed like 3 skunks. At least that's what I told her they were. But it is good to see everyone tonight. Before we begin, I've asked Craig to lead us in a word of prayer. All right. Okay, so we're continuing on with our lessons this quarter on Sermon on the Mount. And one of these days. Blair, do you mind advancing the slide for me, please? See, that's the nice way to ask, Buck.
No, just turn on the side.
Mm-hmm. Whatever. All right, so we are continuing with Sermon on the Mount, right? Lesson 4, talking about the Beatitudes. It's a different, attitude that we're talking about than the one I normally deal with Haley, because she has an A+ attitude. But no, when we look at the Beatitudes, right, again, this quarter studying the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to see how he opens, Christ that is, opens his lesson to his disciples and the crowds that listened. Again, just some context and setting as a reminder of what we talked about some on Sunday. Jesus is still very much in his early phase of his ministry in the region of Galilee, teaching people. And what was the main message that we see that he was out teaching? Yeah, to repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right? And so we see here in the Beatitudes, what we're going to see tonight is the Beatitudes here describing what the citizens and the characteristics and the character of those citizens of this kingdom would be like. So he's gathered up with his disciples, he's up on the mountain, and begins teaching. What I wanted us to look at, or keep in the back of our minds as we think of like a key thought here for the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus here is sitting, he's teaching, he's one who has authority. Very much, we talked about the symbolism between Moses and him giving the law to the people, and Jesus here is this new lawgiver, so to speak. Just how Moses delivered the law from Mount Sinai, Jesus here from this mount is delivering law. And when we think about what it is that he's really honing that we should have, as we're going through the entire Sermon on the Mount, kind of keeping this in the back of our mind, right? Sunday we talked about another thing. There's probably a lot of things I'm going to say keep in the back of your mind. I think that's where most of my thoughts reside, in the very back of my mind. But we talked about how the sermon here, it's something that's radical, right? And what Jesus is going to be teaching and presenting in all of his message, and how it just kind of turns everything on its head. But I think it's very interesting where he starts out here with his disciples in this sermon and this teaching, and we see these blessings rather than the commands. So I want to start, and I want to read our passage for tonight in Matthew 5, 3 through 12. All right, we see here Jesus speaking, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All right, so getting into some of the cultural context of the time, right? This is first century. All right, so who is in charge of the known world at this time? Who's the world superpower? All right, Rome. All right, how do you think Rome looked, and what would be their expectation of someone who was blessed? All right, riches. Any other thoughts? Powerful. Yeah, these are some of the ones that I thought of too. Yeah, Doug, do you have one?
I was just going to say, blessed, you could also insert happy in there.
Insert happy?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's, yeah, and I think that's one that a lot of, when you look at, especially maybe even the Romans, they would also automatically assert it with that, right? Is happy. We talk about it, prosperous, rich, powerful, elite, because they're, Romans, right? They're class of people. Well, the Jews in this time frame, what do you think they would equate being blessed with?
Probably think in the time, independence from Rome would have been a huge blessing.
Yeah. That was one of the first things I had was, right, this idea of national triumph, not being under Rome's hand, so to speak, right? That to a Jew, because we see that's throughout all of Christ's ministry, right? That was a big thing that he was fighting. Is so many, and what we're going to look at in the sermon here, so many people are still in this idea of the physical, right? And the Jewish nation in Israel becoming, their own superpower again, and not being under siege and under Roman rule, just back to when it was when King David was in control, right? But what we see is I think Jesus redefines blessings, and it's a complete reversal of what we saw with whether it's Romans, whether it's with the Jews of that time. But when they thought of it as success, wealth, power, comfort, right? That meant blessings. One thing here, little chart. Is that too small to read? Yeah, it's pretty small, isn't it? Sorry about that. When we look at this idea of worldly values versus kingdom values, worldly values will say something like self-sufficient and prideful. That's something you should value, that if you have pride, you're self-sufficient. But we see a contrast, kingdom values, Beatitudes that we're looking at tonight, poverty of spirit, showing dependence on God is what verse 3 is trying to point out. Maybe it's pleasure and indulgence is what the world views as something of valuable and that would be a blessing. But instead we see from the Beatitudes, mourning, particularly mourning over sins, verse 4. Assertiveness or dominance, what the world would say is something that way. Well, meekness and submission is what the Beatitudes say, verse 5, right? And going on down this list, right, pursuit of self-fulfillment versus hungering and thirsting for righteousness, demanding fairness or seeking revenge rather than showing mercy, having a good outward appearance and image rather than having purity of heart, winning arguments, winning wars rather than being peaceful, making peace, avoiding any type of hardships, any problems, right? Trying to take the easy way out rather than rejoicing if you're being persecuted for Christ. So when we look at this, charts, and I know it's very small, what would y'all say best characterizes the world today that we live in society, and what they would consider successful? Oh, that was a softball question. Yeah, the worldly side, right? They would, I think, if we went and did a poll, and you didn't have the very top header. Oh, thanks, Blair. If you didn't have that top header and you just showed the two side by side, and they said, which one would you rather have? They're going to, 9 out of 10 times maybe select that left-hand side of worldly, right? So as we're going to look at tonight, you know, how does Jesus' definition of blessings challenge this worldview in our society today? And if no one has an answer, we can wait till we go through everything, and then everyone will have an answer.
It's more inwardly than what people can see on the outside.
Yeah. Okay. More inwardly than what people see on the outside.
Favorite word last week,
Radical.
radical.
Yeah. No, I agree, right? You know, they view that and it's a radical thought to have that belief, right?
Not even in their mind.
True. Might not even be something that they comprehend or even think about. Well, I like looking up definitions because a lot of times I don't know what a lot of things mean. Anyone know what blessed, the meaning of blessed, right? We just read it, 8 to 9 times. I think if it shows up that much, it might be important to truly understand what it means. Anyone got a thought? Fortunate or happy? Fortunate, happy, I heard Martha. Same thing, happy. All right. Well, anyone know the Greek word here? Who's the Greek scholars?